A. Flann O'Brien's novel, The Third Policeman, was initially published in 1967, a year after the author's death. His real name was Brian O'Nolan, and he wrote under various pen names, completing this particular book sometime around 1940. It was initially rejected by publishers, so he set the manuscript aside, and for nearly 25 years, it was believed to be lost. Now, the novel itself is even more bizarre than the story of its publication. It features a first-person account of an unnamed narrator who begins by telling us about his odd childhood. He reveals his fascination with a philosopher named Dalkey. Then he and an accomplice rob and murder an older man named Mathers. The story takes a full turn into madness when the narrator attempts to recover the hidden money that they stole. This leads him into a sort of dream landscape dominated by a two-dimensional police barracks, where he begins interacting with the policemen who patrol the area. The first of these is Sergeant Pluck, who only seems concerned with bicycle-related crimes, which apparently dominate the police department's time. Later, he meets the second policeman, McCruskeen, who's a machine genius, a steam-powered imaginative inventor who crafts contraptions that defy the laws of physics and logic. At first, we only hear about the mysterious third policeman, Fox, but eventually we meet him too. From learning about atomic theory and the secret road to eternity, to rallying an army of one-legged men, the plot is pure wackiness. Just as crazy, though, are the narrator's increasingly in-depth footnotes from his own academic studies into the life of Dalkey. These footnotes build up the mythology around the various commentators who all go a touch crazy themselves, and the philosopher who's so ridiculously crazy you wonder about anybody that would dedicate their life to studying him. The Third Policeman opens with a pretty straightforward style and reads kinda like Poe, with an unreliable narrator discussing how he was involved in a horrible crime. But once it gets going, it is firmly entrenched in the absurd, with looping conversations, hyper-bizarre incidents, wild theories, and romantic chemistry between people and bicycles. It's experimental and full of humor, yet it maintains an unsettling and sinister tone throughout the narrative. The Third Policeman is a funny novel, but it's also disorienting and horrifying. It is a postmodern comic nightmare that makes for a distinct but highly engaging read. The first time I read this novel, it was from this Dalkey Archive Press edition after learning about the book through the TV show Lost. It's a trade paperback, and it features a garish illustration of the police barracks on the front cover. It has an 8-page introduction from Dennis Donahue, an Irish literary critic. He provides some biographical details on the author, and looks to place the novel in a tradition of Menippean satire, then highlights its place in Irish literature. It closes with a publisher's note with 2 brief pieces of writing about the book from the author. The printing quality is problematic in this edition, with inconsistencies and faint artifacts that impact the reading experience. When I had the chance to upgrade to a more deluxe illustrated hardcover treatment of such a unique book, I decided to take it. So let's do this. Here we have The Third Policeman from the Folio Society. This version was originally released in 2006 and is presented in a plain green paper slipcase. It has a cover designed by David Eccles and features a bold illustration blocked in black and gold of 2 policemen riding bicycles around a sort of Penrose triangular loop. A third policeman seems to be suggested by the combined cast shadows. Behind this are a bunch of thin atomic particles in gold, and all of this is on a bold green cloth that wraps around to the back. On the spine we note the title, author, and publisher name all in gold, and the binding is finished with green and white head and tail bands. When we crack the book open, we see plain olive green end papers in a medium stock. The book is printed on Caxton wove paper, which is smooth and slightly off-white according to my color swatches. Each of the novel's 12 chapters has this great headpiece illustration of one of McCruskeen's inventions, complete with gears and a trumpet and a scrambled clock that indicates the chapter number. If we bring back the Dalkey Archive Press edition for a brief side-by-side, we can see that the Folio Society version is slightly bigger, with an extra centimeter in both the height and width. The font size is larger, with more generous spacing and margins in the Folio version. With the consistency issues in the Dalkey version, the improvement when it comes to readability of the Folio edition is really appreciated here. The introduction is by Richard Forte, a paleontologist and author who has his own books published by the Folio Society. In this excellent 8-page introduction, he discusses the wacky academia and mad machinery present in the world of the novel, while expressing appreciation for the author's humor and the hope that this Folio edition brings more readers to the work of Flann O'Brien. He mentions many of the details of the plot without full spoilers, so that the introduction is safe for first-time readers of the novel. David Eccles provides 9 interior illustrations. He's a prolific contributor to Folio books, having illustrated many covers over the years. I know his work from the Folio version of the Maltese Falcon, which was done in a noir comic book style, but what he presents here is far better in my opinion. The illustrations are in black and white, and are these intricate and stunning montages that are presented on the same paper as the text, and land right next to the text they coincide with. Let's take a detailed look at the artwork now. The first illustration is a cool 2-part image. It begins with a clock-like shape and the outline of a police officer peering at the viewer from inside. When we flip the page over, we see the other half of the image across the title page, which is of an officer pulling a brand new bicycle from one of the porthole-like rooms from Chapter 8. The interplay between the two images is quite pleasing, especially because of the hint of the mechanical circular door here. The second piece is a depiction of the narrator's nighttime roadside murder of Old Mathers. We can see him in the puddle's reflection wildly hammering down with his spade. The ground is made up of tiny little intricately drawn nooses that drip down like blood. In the foreground we can see a copy of one of de Selby's books that's often referred to and developed in the novel's footnotes, along with a portrait and the bicycle pump which was used to initially knock the victim down before he was murdered. The third piece is an illustration of a scene from Chapter 3, where our narrator ponders the symbolism of roads suggested by the map in the lower corner. He meets a man named Martin Funicane in a ditch. The old robber and murderer smokes his pipe, and artist David Eccles has filled the cloud of smoke with many elements from the conversation. The penny Funicane hands over, the bees that buzz about, the steam machinery and contraptions of life are depicted like an illustrated manual, culminating in a murderer's arm and knife, with feathery shapes on either side that recall the narrator's description of the ditch. In the center are 2 crossed wooden legs. Each of these men has one, and are bound as brothers in this odd fraternity. The whole thing evokes an absurd coat of arms. The fourth image is a depiction of the wacky inventions of Policeman McCruskeen. At the top, we can see the machine he's built to produce a music that only he can personally hear. There's a pair of glasses and a roll of film running through this, bringing our eyes to the centerpiece, which is the intricately built and perfectly finished series of boxes, which rest inside each other like nested Russian dolls. David Eccles has even included the kitchen sink. Below that, we see some of the inventor's schematics, and they blend into the reality of the image here as a magnifying glass emerges up out of the same drawing it magnifies. This is another expertly composed montage. The fifth illustration is of Mr. Gilhaney, who we learn is becoming more and more like a bicycle. At this point he's 48% bicycle, and as the image suggests, he will become more and more bike-like as time moves on. These little atomic details at the top are similar to what we saw back on the cover, but here they have very tiny little elves dancing between them. The impressive element of this particular piece is how the degree of detail increases as we move down the drawing, from these loose morphing echoes to bits of landscape, a bicycle seat, and different styles of bike pedals and teeth. The sixth image depicts a scene from the beginning of Chapter 8 when the narrator lies down on a bed and falls asleep. He becomes planetary, as we can see in the tremendous detail, as his wooden leg and his other leg, now also made of wood, sweep through the universe. The lower part of the image evokes de Selby's concept of night, as volcanoes and factories spew out the darkness and bottles are used to attempt to trap it. This creates the reverse silhouette of a policeman with gun drawn in the negative space. The seventh image is of eternity, full of cogwheels and gears and knobs and dials. We get a cross-section of the lift that is presented like a schematic drawing, along with a list of the items the narrator requests: a suit, jewels, bananas, whiskey, and gold cubes. Check out the detailed penwork on the ceiling here. The eighth illustration has many elements to it as well. It's inspired by a passage about Sergeant Pluck's bicycle after our narrator steals it to escape the barracks. Here we see the noose and ladder, the bike itself with a watch, a cycling bell, a seat, an air balloon, a wave, and a tiny falling hammer, which are all details from the main story. But here, part of the DeSelby footnotes feature into the composition too, as we get an inventory of the massive arsenal that the DeSelby commentator Hackjaw was discovered with. The same rolling S structure of this piece is present on the next one too. The ninth and final illustration is of the mysterious black cash box that's been hunted since early in the novel. During a conversation with the titular third policeman who operates out of this tall, narrow station, our narrator learns that the box contains omnium, which can make wishes come true. It can be used to cook the perfect egg, but can also be used for much grander things too. The strawberries curl up out of the box in a double helix in front of a silhouette of an atomic explosion. Details like DeSelby's absurd plans for habitations and the hint of a seductive bicycle tire creeping out from behind are just too good. There are so many clever little nods to textual details in these drawings. Finally, this Folio Society edition of the book closes with the same two publisher's notes that we saw in the Dalkey press version. I am really impressed with this edition of The Third Policeman. It has an exceptional introduction, wonderful illustrations, and a beautiful design. It can be a pricey book on the secondary market, but it is well made, and with the problematic printing issues that my old trade paperback edition suffered from, I'm happy to move it to the box of doom, because now I have this amazing copy that provides a much improved and enhanced reading experience. And that's why it's important to upgrade your books. That's quite a pancake. As always, thanks for watching, and keep an eye out for future videos.